Colors, more than a feeling. Imagine when you're in front of a piece of art, that you're this piano, that you're having made all these beautiful sounds in your interior by a pianist, by an artist, just by looking and participating in art. This is part 2 of the series based on Kandinsky's book of the spiritual in art, in painting in particular. My name is Wani. I am a philosophy student at La Sorbonne, and I read this book for my class on aesthetics. And this video will be cut up into 3 parts. The first part is the double effect of colors, the physical and the emotional, or spiritually emotional. The second is piano, pianist, your soul, and the artist. I thought this was super interesting when I actually really broke down this section, and I was just like, whoa, that's actually what he meant. And the third part is art as therapy, chaos and Mozart. How exciting. All right, so let us begin with part 1, page 103. When we let our eyes run across a palette covered with colors, a double effect happens. What happens is a purely physical effect. That is to say, the eye itself is charmed by the beauty and other properties of color. The spectator feels an impression of appeasement, of joy, like a gastronome or a foodie who eats confectionery or candy. Page 104, and the same with the physical sensation of the cold in ice cream, when it penetrates more profoundly, awakens other more profound sensations that can evoke a chain of psychic events. The superficial impression of color can develop itself until it becomes an event. Page 105, if this development goes far enough, these objects and this being acquires an interior value and finally an interior resonance. And in the case of more complete development, this elementary effect provokes one that is more profound, that leads to or entails an emotion of the soul. So here we see through development a passage from a superficial impression, a physical elementary element, to something more profound, which is an event, which is the emotion of the soul. In this case, we arrive at the second primordial result of the contemplation of color, which provokes the vibration of the soul. And the first force, physical elementary, becomes now the way in which color arrives at or reaches at the soul or touches the soul. So here, if you go back to the first video, which is where we talked about the lost why, le quoi perdu, and how it is that the why, the comment, the body, is necessary for us to arrive at le quoi perdu, which is l'art de l'âme, which is the soul of art. So in the same way, we needed this elementary physical impression of color so that we can have the color that actually reaches the soul, which creates an emotion of the soul and not just a physical impression. And in this next section, he's essentially making the argument of the connection between the mind and the body, so anti-Descartes. So the soul being, en règle générale, generally closely or intimately linked to the body, it is possible that a psychic emotion will lead to another corresponding by association. For example, the color red can provoke a vibration of the soul that is similar to one that is produced by a flame. The hot red is exciting, and this excitement, excitation is not just excitement, no? This excitement, excitation, or arousal can be painful or difficult, maybe because it resembles blood that flows. Here, this color awakens a memory of another physical agent which always exerts on the soul a difficult action. Here's how we go from the pain and pleasure experienced by the body to the emotion of excitation of the soul based on this color red. So page 109, whoever has heard spoken color therapy will know this action of colored light on the body. Here's just a scientific argument of how it is that color affects the body, which is not an insignificant example, and you have to watch part 3 to see what I mean. Page 110, and here we're moving on to piano, pianist, your soul, and the artist. So kind of more and more about what it is that an artist does. So as a general rule, color is therefore a way of exerting direct influence on the soul. La couleur est la touche, l'œil est la marteau, l'âme est le piano aux cordes nombreuses. Picture this. Your soul is the instrument of a piano. And I don't know if you guys know how pianos are actually constructed, but in a piano, there are hammers that hit on strings. And what he's saying here is that this thing that vibrates is your soul. You're the piano that vibrates. And your eye is the hammers that causes these vibrations by perceiving color. And these colors are la touche. La touche are the keys. So these keys are the different notes. So red is a note, blue is a note. Maybe there's different tonalities and different combinations of notes. So once we're done appreciating this beautiful imagery, L'artiste est la main. The artist is the hand, qui par l'usage convenable de telle ou telle touche met l'âme en vibration. By the appropriate usage of such and such key puts the human soul in vibration. Like, if that is not the most beautiful definition of what an artist does, I have not come across better. So you can comment and let me know if you have, but that was amazing. It is therefore clear that the harmony of colors has to rest on the principle of entry in efficient contact with the human soul. So the harmony of colors created by this efficient usage of colors, keys of the painter, so that when our eyes perceive it, it is a point of entry into our soul, our human soul. This base will be like the principle of the interior necessity. This interior necessity, I've read the book only once because I didn't have time to go over it again. But I haven't really found this thing other than this is what he means when he talks about the soul, but not just like any soul, but the workings of the soul. So like the essence of the soul in terms of what is the most necessary and what is the most interior, which is the soul. But I'm not going to go further because I don't have any basis to say anything else. But here I read it as the principle of entry, which is the harmony created by the artist, is the same base as the necessity of the soul. So that's how it is that you come into contact when these two things align with each other. One is the exterior, which is the composition of colors, the composition of notes, so that it comes in alignment, or it has the same frequency, if you want to say it like that, with the essence of the soul. So colors applied correctly, efficiently. The other exterior, the pianist, is that which vibrates your soul, the interior, the piano. So it's insane. I think this image is insane. Just imagine when you're in front of a piece of art, that you're this piano, that you're having made all these beautiful sounds in your interior by a pianist, by an artist, just by looking and participating in art. And with that, I actually have to head off, so if I look different in the next part, you'll know why. I'll see you soon. Hi, and we're back, and there's a bit more sun. So let us begin with the third part, which is art as therapy or relief from the chaos. We'll start with this quote from page 122 to 123. All objects without having been distinguished, whether it had been directly created by nature or it had been fashioned by the hand of man, is an object that is bestowed with their own life and by consequence has an inevitable effect. Man continues to be affected by this psychic influence. A lot of these effects stay in the subconscious, where it acts in a way equally alive and creator or creative. If y'all see the book moving, it's because I have to check if I copied the citations correctly. So a lot of them stay inside the subconscious and a lot of them reaches the subconscious, these effects. Man can free themselves from this great number of manifestations enclosing their spirit. So this, for me, like when I read it, I thought of it as us being desensitized to life, and also maybe one of the reasons why we don't feel art anymore. And that's why we have the artist to no longer turn away from what is higher than, what is more than the material. Nature, that is to say that the environment, that constantly moving of man, puts continually through the intermediary of these keys, objects, the chords of the piano, which is the soul, in vibration. These effects that appear to us often as chaotic result in three elements. L'effet de la couleur de l'objet, the effect of the color of the object, de sa forme, its form, et l'effet propre, and the effect itself, indépendant de la forme et de la couleur, which is independent from both the form and the color. So we have the color, its form, and the effect, which is separate from color and form. It is therefore the artist that intervenes. In the place of nature, it is he who puts things into order, ordonne. And mettre en œuvre can be said as application, execute, highlight, bring forward, or literally put into a piece of art. Ces trois facteurs, these three factors. This is a very old philosophy film video thing that I made based on my trip to Siena and Florence, and it has the introduction that I wrote for literature, and it talks a bit further about this idea how life is chaotic and the artist is the one who actually creates order. If you're interested, I'll have the link down below. But to continue, as a result, what is important here is efficiency. The choice of the object element which, in harmony with the forms, give an accessory sound, dépend d'un contact efficace avec l'âme humaine, depends on the efficient contact with the human soul. The word that I'm really interested in here is the word efficiency. What does that mean when it's efficient? as in like an efficient composition. I think we talked about this before, but essentially it is something that is more considered, but I wouldn't consider something efficient as... So I checked for the definition of efficient, which produces in good conditions without other help with the expected effect. Okay, and then the other definition in terms of theology is grace which always produces its effect, and the last definition is donc la volonté ou l'action sont suivies d'effet. Oh, where an action or a will is followed by the effect. So essentially, it's the capacity to create exactly what you want without missing the mark. That's so interesting. Basically, the idea of like, you know exactly how it is that things need to fit together so that they produce a specific effect, compared to the haphazardness of life, of nature, because they don't have the expected effect and therefore chaotic. So again, the consequence of this is the choice of object relève, raise or falls under equally the principle of the interior necessity, which is the inner resonance or the essence of the soul, as how I've concluded it. Again, this is not what he said. The thing that I actually want to share here as a tangent before we talk a bit about Mozart is this idea of stable image by Wolflin in his book, which I have the name somewhere, not here. Okay, use my memory. The Foundational Principles of the History of Art. And I want to talk about the stable image, but when I read it, I didn't think it was a noteworthy citation, so I didn't copy it. But what I did copy was actually the fundamental concept of the art of the Italian Renaissance. It's about perfect proportion and static perfection. So let me share that with you. It is page 33 of that book that I mentioned. The fundamental concept on which Italian Renaissance art rests upon is that of the perfect proportion. In architecture, as in the statues, this epoch tried to realize the idea of static perfection. Each form tends towards constituting a closed and free reality in its articulations. Mieux encore, better still, each part breathes in an independent way, whether it be columns or the fragments of a mural surface or the volume of a proportion of space or its totality, or an edifice envisaged in its mass. We find in presence of explicit forms which allows man to learn a reality that rests in itself, that surpasses the human measure, but remains forever accessible to imagination. The spirit, in experiencing the feeling of an infinite well-being, sees in this art the image of a higher reality, plus libre, more free, but in which it is given to him to participate. So the analogy that I want to bring here is one, the idea of static perfection, and also this idea of freedom, because it goes past the human measure, and this idea that we keep repeating, which is to aim higher. And I actually asked this question to my professor of why is it that we see divine as something towards the sky? And he couldn't answer me, and I don't know how pertinent the question was. Besides the fact that, I guess, you know, I could be wrong, but how it's described in the Bible or in the media or in imagery that I grew up with or that I'm familiar with, it's always that heaven and God and the celestial and the spiritual, you always think about looking up. And I just really wonder why it is that it's placed up there. Where did this Shema come from? But anyway, I just thought that this passage was really beautiful because it's the idea that something that is physical and material can actually help us get past our own finitude, because it's not based on the human measure, but this measure that's outside of ourselves that actually invites us to join in the infinite with our imagination. So this is like the fun tension that I believe is within, and which is important to question about why it is that we need and require art. How it is that it is something that enables us to actually, in a way, connect to the spiritual through the material. So now let's go back to Kandinsky with the last part that I would like to talk about, which is the idea of harmony introduced through the work of Mozart. So page 165, L, which is the works of Mozart, is for us a regenerative or nurturing pause in the tumult or chaos of our interior life, a consolating image, un espoir, a hope, but that we hear it all the same as a resonance of an indifferent finished period which at its heart is foreign to us. The struggle of sounds, lost equilibrium, principes qui tombent, principles that fall, roulement des tambours entendus, the unexpected thunder of drums, Grande question, big questions. Recherche apparemment sans but, a search that apparently has no goal. Impulses or impetus apparently torn. Et nostalgie and nostalgia. Broken chains and links. In reconnecting or in reviving many in one. Contraste et contradiction. Contrast and contradiction. Voilà notre harmonie. Here it is, our harmony. Founded on this harmony, the composition is a construction of colored and design forms that exist independently as it is, proceeding from interior necessity and forming by this common life, in this way created, en tout que l'on nomme tableau, a whole that we call tableau, painting or picture. So to me, this is actually a second layer of how it is that we could try to understand what Kandinsky means by harmony. So if you go back to my first video, there is this analogy of people watching, how it is like everyone's in the same wagon and everyone's separated by their different destinies, and how it is that in the end, whether it be a giraffe or a lion or a walrus, how we, in the end, no matter what, we find ourselves in the same zoological garden. So here in a similar way, with the analogy of Mozart as the artist, what is actually sublime here is that it's no longer this idea that life gives us chaos in terms of the effects, but the artist, in terms of Mozart, is able to design or create harmony of all the contrasts and of all the contradictions. So it's not so much about getting rid of things to kind of trying to find this like essential order, but it's actually following this thing that what we called before, which is efficace, which is efficient, that he's able to bring together all these elements in a way that it forms a whole. And this whole that we call tableau, or any work of art of an artist. And how this work of art is all at once something that is foreign to us, and it is our harmony. So to go back to the citation that I quoted from Wolflin, the idea of the art renaissance about this static perfection, it's something that passes human measure and therefore foreign to us. But in a way, it's the thing that gives us harmony, gives us this sense of stability of our soul, a sense of the infinite well-being. And here he uses the word une pause bienfaisante. So Mozart, in this way, gives us a sense of a nurturing or regenerative pause from the chaos, with this stability or non-stability, or this harmony that's created from non-stability, contradictions, and contrast. So I hope this was interesting and helpful to you. And to give you a bit of an idea of what part 3 is going to be about, it is called the movement of color contrast. So I'll be talking about the two main contrasts, which is blue and yellow, black and white, and their double effects that explains their significance. So how it is that blue is celestial and calm, yellow is terrestrial and rage, white is pure and non-sonority, and black being its complete absence. So death. I thank you for your time, and I'll talk to you soon.